advice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't wrong.
Hello, Matt. Good morning.
Morning, Rob.
How's it going, Matt? How are things? How is everything holding up in your part of the country? Everything fine? All is well and good and love in the time of coronavirus?
Houston keeps trying to drown me.
One way or another, yeah.
Rainstorm,
the city's
hurricane, storm surge, or it's a burst pipe. But we're all fine here.
We're all fine here. You know, we love to joke. We love to tell jokes on this podcast. It's some might say it's a
one of us does
funny podcast. Sometimes I wouldn't say that. I don't think it's funny at all. But actually, there was a legit coronavirus case here in Portland just 2 days ago, and they're making runs on all the grocery stores. And so, if you don't hear from Rob this week, that's why. Portland has consumed itself in a fury of rage and fear.
I'm sure once the vaccine comes out, everyone in Portland will just get it and be fine.
Yeah, no, there's never been any problem with the taking of vaccines here in Portland, Oregon. Anyway, enough news. This is Dungeon Master of None, the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game podcast where we're always on topic and never distracted by current events.
We could talk about news in role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, which is the next hardcover has been leaked.
We could talk about that, or we could talk about anything else. No, we should talk about it. Well, what is the next hardcover?
Right, so it looks like a hardcover that is going to be based on Thelos. I think I'm saying that right.
I think so too.
Which is a Magic the Gathering plane inspired by Greek stuff.
Greek mythology, it seems like. This is a Greek mythology themed book, but Greek mythology as viewed through the lens of Magic the Gathering, which is fine. I am interested in a Greek and or ancient myth inspired setting. I don't know that I particularly want it to be laundered through Magic the Gathering first, but what I want and what Wizards of the Coast decides is valuable or profitable are two things that are very rarely in alignment. And if you were listening to this podcast, you've heard this many a time. Our bread and butter is disappointment here on Dungeon Master of None, so we're just gonna see what happens. Ravnica wasn't awful. I'm sure Thelos won't be awful either. It's just not my favorite thing, you know?
Yeah. Is it Thelos or Theros? I
sorry. I think it's Theros.
I think I said Theros. So there was there was a Kickstarter that I remember doing really well back in the day, and
yeah,
I think it was called Dragon Lord's Odyssey, and this one's called The Odysseys of Theros.
Well, sure.
The Odyssey of the Dragon Lords.
Gotta have Odyssey
was
in
the
there.
Kickstarter.
So you know what it is, right? So you know that there's
right.
An Odyssey involved.
It made $500,000. Odyssey of the Dragon Lords.
Matt is pointing out, and as others have pointed out, this has been a very popular third-party and homebrew avenue. Is building a Greek-inspired world. Because Wizards has kind of overlooked this for a long time. So, if you were somebody who invested in that or worked on that, this might feel like a bit of a punch in the gut. But, I as always, we're going to try to adopt a wait-and-see approach. It might be actually a great book. Who knows? But we'll just see.
I mean, do you have any desire to run a Greek themed or inspired campaign, and if not, what would the reasons behind that
I do not, but Matt, let me be honest, 22-year-old Rob would have leapt at the idea. Younger Rob would have been very excited about running a Greek mythology themed campaign. That's just not something I'm super interested in now, but there was definitely a time in my life when I was super into Greek myths, when I had recently read the Metamorphoses and watched the Sam Worthington, Clash of the Titans remake, and was feeling all excited about those things. So I'm definitely not like turning my nose up at a Greek mythology themed campaign. It's just not what I'm particularly interested in now. And again, if this were a book that were just sort of, here's a vaguely ancient Greece setting rather than a vaguely ancient Greece Magic the Gathering Dungeons and Dragons setting, I would feel differently.
Yeah. Sorry, the name was Mythic Odysseys of Theros.
Ah, okay. Well, sorry.
More than one Odyssey.
Many Odysseys.
Uh-huh. Now, I like Greek mythology, and I think you can find a fun game inspired by this. But, I mean, if you're going to do Greek mythology, something outside the high medieval Western Europe stuff, you might as well go maybe a little further afield. But
I wouldn't. Well, the other thing is, I wouldn't necessarily run this in Dungeons and Dragons, right? I think there are better settings. I guess it depends on what you want to do. But if we're talking mythic heroes, then there are better settings than D&D.
Right.
Something like
better systems.
Better systems. Sorry.
Yeah.
But there are, if you're doing something like, I don't know, Jason and the Argonauts, where everybody is, I don't know, roughly human in power level, that could be done pretty well in D&D. But other mythic tales might, I don't know. This is a consistent problem in that D&D is the most popular and most robust system, but it is, as we have repeatedly observed, not all that great for, well, a lot of different types of storytelling. This being one.
Yeah, I just, oh man, the combo of this with Magic the Gathering, I guess, is the weird thing to me.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this MTG setting. I assume there's been a set or two or several released. I wasn't playing at the time, so I'm not familiar with it, but because I'm not here's the thing, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I am going to try to adopt a wait and see approach, because I don't know what this is. But not immediately impressed by the idea.
Yeah, I have to say, gosh, not what I wanted, but that's fine. We'll see if it's good. I mean, there should be more Greek stuff. There should be more mythological stuff.
I agree. So, one thing that I was thinking about,
Matt, what would have been cool is, like, let's take an ancient Mediterranean world where we could have, Egyptian and Phoenician and Sumerian and the East African, like, in this like weird mix of things.
The tremendous Age of Mythology video game, combined Egyptian and Greek and Norse, myths into a big old strategy clusterfuck, and that works just fine. You could create a world where all the myths and mythological monsters and whatnot are present and engaged in the setting, and that would be interesting. But this seems this seems like not quite as ambitious as it could be, I suppose, which I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by based on Wizards' recent decision making. Matt, one of the things hold on.
Okay.
We just had a big chunky episode about Dark Sun, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe what this says to me is that those of us who are languishing in the hanging on to our nostalgic memories of Dark Sun and
or any of the other
or
settings.
Any of the other settings that have been ignored or abandoned. Maybe it's time for us to start homebrewing or kickstartering or doing our own thing, because it seems like maybe Wizards is not going to re-up those old settings. I mean, Eberron I was surprised by. I honestly kind of thought they were just going to give up on it, but it's popular enough. So that's not a huge disappointment. But beyond that, you know, I gotta wonder if, you know, if any of the other, you know, old school ones are going to come back.
You know, maybe it's a good thing to just move on from these. I mean, we are getting some of what we wanted, which is something that is new.
Right.
And regardless of whether I'll ever play a campaign in Wildmont or Theros, probably no to both. There'll hopefully be something that's new that I can steal.
Yeah, I'm looking forward
that's a nice thing.
To reading them and seeing what's new and interesting. It's just not, the whole package is not for me. But again, Matt, we are not, I think, the target audience, as we have repeatedly, I have to keep reminding myself. So
I don't understand why Wizards has invested so much in a crossover between Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, two fantasy games that are very, very different but share a common idea of fantasy, yet hasn't come out with some simple yet interesting rules or a book, an entire book on this, on how to be the cool titular heroes of Magic the Gathering, of how to actually, your heroes are planeswalkers. It blows my mind.
Yeah,
I know the scale of D&D isn't set up to like be planeswalkers, because these are like literally possibly like immortal heroes that jump through time and space.
Yeah.
And are super cool, but why wouldn't you want to do that?
I mean, that's interesting to me. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, my instinct, my cynic's instinct tells me that it's easier to do this, to do a setting book, than it is to approach the fundamental mechanics and rules and think about how to be a planeswalker and or Magic the Gathering magician in Dungeons and Dragons, which is, I think, kind of a missed opportunity. I think that would be very interesting.
If I was to ever play something set in a Magic the Gathering plane, I would only want to play in or run a campaign where the players themselves, every one of them, was some type of planeswalker, because that's the actual story. Everyone else is just pawns in what's going on here.
Yeah.
Perseus and Andromeda will be happy together. Have fine sons. Rule wisely. And to perpetuate the story of his courage, I command that from henceforth he will be set among the stars and constellations. He, Perseus, the lovely Andromeda, the noble Pegasus, and even the vain Cassiope. Let the stars be named after them forever.
Okay, well, enough about speculating about the next book. Yeah. It's Greek. It's Theros? Many Theros? Odysseys of Theros.
The mini blood drawings of Theranos.
Let's talk about some Unearthed Arcana. Those of you who are keeping track will know that we are super far behind, so we are going to try to cover 3. They have released 3 subclasses, I think, this year, right?
They've released 3 subclass documents. That's 9 new playtest subclasses for the Barbarian, Monk, Paladin, Warlock, Bard, Cleric, Sorcerer, Artificer, Druid, and Ranger. And you're like, oh, wow, that's a lot. And if you, like us, are like, well, Wizards is probably going to release another Splat book. By that, we need a book with options for player characters. You're probably not wrong, and I would be surprised if we don't see this very soon.
Yeah, I think when they announce it, we should take some. We should put our put our opinions on the line and try to guess which ones are going to actually make it into the final book. But
yeah, why don't we just start with which one did you really like of these 9, 10 subclasses that we've gotten so far this year?
So there were 2 that I liked a lot, actually. I liked, weirdly enough, the Unity Domain Cleric a lot. I thought that was actually pretty cool. And
Yeah, let's talk about that one for a second.
okay, so the cleric remains kind of it has always been in sort of the intersection of high powered but thematically kind of uninteresting. There's just not a lot of super cool class abilities for a cleric. They all play kind of similarly, and this doesn't really fix that, but I like the theme of the Unity domain a little bit more than some of the others. You can just form a bond with one of your allies, and you get a lot of abilities that let you mitigate damage or help people. A lot of the stuff actually that we worked on with our recent Paragon, helping others in combat, which I think is fun and neat, and the theme is cool. It feels like a solidarity cleric, cleric of unions and socialism.
Yeah,
I'm a big
I
fan.
think it's a super cool idea in that a couple times per day when one of your allies gets hit, you can distribute the damage evenly among your party, which is a way to make your healing less efficient, possibly in the long run, right? As it's harder to heal up a few hit points, but it can save someone from actually going low.
It can, and it makes short rests a little bit more attractive, right? There are new abilities. It's interesting, and I think that it has a couple of potentials for both big plays and for just interesting. It's got an interesting theme. I liked the Unity domain cleric. I'm a big cleric fan. I just feel like they're pretty boring to play. I like divine magic, and I like being a support and healer type. When I haven't played an actual character in years, but when I think about it, I often tend towards divine soul, favored soul, something that does divine casting, but usually not a cleric because they're just kind of not very interesting. And I like Unity domain is something I would play, I guess, so this really stuck out to me.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting ideas for classes here, like the clockwork sorcerer. I like the idea of a lawful sorcerer or a mechanic sorcerer. I don't know about clockwork. It wasn't my favorite. My favorite of these actually is probably the Paladin Oath of the Watchers.
That was good, actually. I like that.
They gave the Paladin a lot of bonus spells that come from usually a wizard list, like Alarm and Counterspell, Non-Detection. And I love this idea as a sort of a hunter protector of weird supernatural threats, Paladin. And it's the abilities are good. So illustrate that. I would play a Paladin of the Watchers. This one I think is ready to go.
Yeah, the Watchers is really cool. I liked this one too. It's a great idea. You're on the lookout for extra planar threats, aberrations. I mean, this would work awesomely in a Planescape campaign, or really any campaign that even so much hints at the planes or devils or demons or aberrations. I would love to play this in a Avernus campaign. The abilities are good. They're not more powerful than some of the other Paladin things. And like Matt said, this is just a very cool theme.
Yeah.
Other standouts, I also liked the Clockwork Soul. Was interesting, Matt, because
Let's talk about it.
I think this is interesting because I like the idea of a lawful sorcerer, one that draws power from
Me too.
Mechanus, especially, but the whole clockwork thing doesn't really work because there's not really enough steampunk spells and or abilities to make this make sense, because it gives you the impression of a monocle wearing, top hat with gears on it type of Victorian sorcerer, but in practice it's just a lawful sorcerer.
Right, if they had just called this axiomatic soul,
yeah,
it would have made better sense. And I wouldn't mind a player playing one and just being I'm a lawful sorcerer. I am part of the forces of law flow through my blood.
Yeah.
Mathematical equations are constantly flashing in my eyes, right?
Yeah, I love the Bulwark of Law, the shield that you can create, the 6th level feature. It's a super it's just a neat thing to do. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because it's a cool idea where the theme doesn't necessarily mesh with the mechanics, but either or would be great, but I don't think that quite the whole like clockwork theme fits with the law theme as they intended. Cool idea though.
Yeah, Bulwark of Law is a better title than the original name for the ability, which I think was Billable Hours for Cattle Attorneys.
Fuck. I also, so look, we should also talk about the armorer, the artificer. So this is a
Back in black. That's how Dad do it, and that's how America does it. It's Iron Man.
It's
right?
Iron Man. It's Iron Man. And we actually had toyed with an idea like this that didn't end up making it into our final artificer book.
I think they ran into the same problem we did, which was you gave all of the abilities defensive ones, and we're like, can this you ever really do anything?
Yeah.
You're like, you can't die, and this is a class that is pretty damn good at not dying.
Yeah. They tried, so it's interesting because it feels like they were a little bit bolder with some, like, they I don't know, sometimes was
right, it's a playtest.
Wizards plays it really close to the chest sometimes, but they gave this some, like, really interesting stuff that doesn't exist anywhere else. You know, a lightning launcher, and, well, that's actually kind of the only thing that's, like, super interesting.
Well, I like that they basically made two subclasses inside the Artificer, right? And they might as well be separate subclasses because when you pick this subclass at 3rd level, you pick either Guardian, Heavy Armor, or Infiltrator, Light Armor, where it's the same armor, but your armor, it gives you stealth abilities as opposed to tanking abilities.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
So it looks like they tried to address the... why would you attack this guy with the Thunder Gauntlets? Like, it's this cool ability where any creature you hit with them has disadvantage to attack anyone but you. But as Matt has pointed out, you don't do a ton of damage already as an Artificer, and the armor doesn't really change that terribly. So, you know, you're this big honking dude in a indestructible suit of armor, but why would anybody... You know, it's the Dwarven Defender problem, right? How are you gonna stop people from just... you know, walking around you to beat the shit out of your squishies.
Well, I mean, it's the same way anything in Dungeons and Dragons stops something through role playing and
right,
and the actual mechanics. I mean, you're just a utility tank instead of a tank that can do damage.
Yeah,
which might work. I don't know. This is actually the one I would be most interested in actually playtesting.
Me too.
Right?
And I'm curious about this one. I want to see how it interacts in actual play. I like the idea. I'm a fan of it. I think it's pretty well balanced. I think this one's pretty cool. I gotta say, I am concerned that this one probably will not make it into the final book unchanged. I have a feeling that it is, in Wizards' estimation, overtuned, and that we're gonna end up with something like, you know, the samurai or the cavalier. You know, they're just so cautious about anything martial-like being overpowered that I'm just concerned that this is going to end up kind of not finished. They added some new infusions, though, which are...
They did. They're fine.
They're fine.
Let's see. There was a Genie Warlock, a Bard of Creation, a Shapeshifter-ish Barbarian, the Path of the Beast. Let's see. Was there anything? There was a Fey Ranger, and I think that's a Druid of the Stars, which feels very Greek. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, all of these were interesting. Actually, none of them were, like, super big duds for me. The Path of the Beast seems actually kind of astonishingly powerful. I'm not sure if I'm reading it right, but, like, as part of, like, when they're raging, you can get a 1d12 tail with reach, or, like, gain hit points when you bite people. I don't know. I'd have to, like, math it out or actually play it, but it seems pretty strong. Any of these others, I liked the genie, the Warlock Genie subclass. That was a cool idea.
You can't go wrong with the Warlock. You need to just go through the monster manual and add every powerful monster as a patron.
Yeah.
Because they're all fun. I mean, I'd play a Warlock who's servant of a genie.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but there's no denying that the Warlock is probably the best designed and best balanced class in 5th edition. They definitely put the most intent and intention into it, I think, in my opinion. Just one guy's opinion. Honestly, I did actually like this package. Of the UAs we've been dealing with recently, a lot of them have been kind of like, bleh. But these were all, pretty good. And there were a few that I would actually be excited to play. So, I think...
we're getting to the point where we've got 2 to 3 per class.
Yeah.
So, I think it's time. I can't think of what else they're going to do before we get this splat book, Xanathar's 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. Who's left? Let's see. We've had Volo, we've had Xanathar, Elminster's Guide to the Mystical and Mundane. Are they gonna let Drizzt write a book? That would be funny.
Drizzt's Guide to Pain.
Yeah, I'm curious who's gonna be the author of our next splat book, because folks, it's coming. Okay, let's answer some mail. Thank you all to everyone who writes in. We're very sorry that it has been a few weeks, months since we answered any significant mail. We're going to try to get through a chunk of it, and hopefully all of it soon. Okay, our first one comes from Dalton, who writes to us about some world workshopping. And I like this one. I had some... this was interesting to me. Dalton writes, DMs, help me with some world workshopping. I'm trying to create lore that will lessen my hatred of elves. I, too, am always trying to write lore that will lessen my hatred of elves, my very least favorite ancestry and or race from time immemorial. Here's what we have so far. As devils were beings of good, seduced by evil. Elves were creatures of chaos, seduced by law. Elves were once spirits of chaotic creation, good demons. They were cast out of the plane of chaotic good and ended up in the Feywild. Elves on the material plane are lawful extremists. So this is what Dalton needs help with. What does a plane of chaotic good look like? What would good demons even do? And what is a plane of chaotic good? How does that relate to the other planes of alignment? I thought this was a very interesting question. We're used to planes of pure good, of pure law, of pure chaos, but what if we subdivided them even further, right? What would a plane of chaotic good look like?
Well, you could look up the Planescape planes of chaotic good, right? Which are, I think, like the Beastlands, and what else? What else is in the chaotic good corner? Elysium, I think. No, that's
Elysium, I think, is lawful good.
Lawful good.
There's some models for this. Right?
Arborea, Bitopia, maybe.
Yeah, so you can always go back to the source to Planescape, but like Matt, I think like the intent in the past and the idea has been that the planes of chaotic good are exactly what they sound like. Full of life, but uncontrolled, often. Sometimes dangerously so. Realms of wild nature seems like a pretty good one. Flowering abundance. I think it makes sense if we're contrasting the Feywild that they came from a place that was perhaps a forest or savanna, sort of like a garden world, but full of overwhelming flora and fauna.
Yeah, I think like the idea of a plane of existence or a world where, we do not sow, no one sowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sort of, from Christian, Jewish mythology, the sort of Garden of Eden, right? Where people are like, they don't actually toil or labor, they hunt or gather. this sort of ancient thing. I would say that works pretty well. And then there's a ton of megafauna, not exactly dangerous, but maybe with a little hint of danger.
Sure. Potentially dangerous if disturbed.
Chaos, right?
Yeah. Unpredictable.
Right. Everything is bigger, right? The mountains are the size of Mount Olympus Mons, right? The waterfalls are 10,000 feet high, and the pterodactyls are the size of rocks. There's probably dinosaurs, too.
Yeah. And as for good demons, they would operate much like evil demons do. They would, primarily go after the forces of law, but with an emphasis probably on opposing devils rather than opposing, celestials or angels.
I do like the idea of elves as lawful extremists, right? Who rejected the sort of chaos of the Feywild and are trying to shape the world into some sort of structured fashion. And I think sort of chaos spirits of something that is, maybe they're called Eladrin. You could just steal that name or something. Hungry creatures that want to dissolve all bonds, reduce thing into swirling chaos, right? And are even more beautiful and deadly than elves. They're elves to elves.
Yeah.
And if you see one, you're probably gonna die. Okay.
Yeah.
Great
I love
question,
it.
Dalton.
Good
Thanks
question.
for writing in. All right, we have another campaign doctor letter. This one is from Anthony. Campaign doctors requested. Hello, DMs Matt and Rob. I have a campaign that is in the need of some doctoring. Really, at this point, it would be an autopsy, but I'm still curious to hear your solution to my problem. I've solved it the best I could, but there had to be a better way to go. I was playing in 5e, and the setting was Ravnica. The players worked for the Orzhov Guild. There was an invasion by the dragon Nicol Bolas with his zombie army, culminating with the events of the War of the Spark. The players were able to shepherd some lower-level godlike planeswalkers and protect them. Part of this is on purpose to set up my next campaign in which they have access to a planeswalking ship and will be more powerful and can deal with external threats themselves. The way I ended up solving things was to have them contribute to part of the battle, even though they were so far removed from the main action that it didn't really matter much to the overall conflict. They fought off their main antagonist and took down a zombified god with the help of some allies. I do feel like they got a sense of accomplishment from this. I still don't know if removing them from the main stage of the final conflict was the correct move or not. How would you deal with this situation where your players are mortals fighting in a war that's going to be decided by demigods? Thanks and love the show. Best regards, Anthony. All right. I think this is a general enough question that we can solve beyond the sort of specifics to Ravnica and Planeswalkers and stuff like that.
Well, this is a good question, and, we just talked about our problems with the Magic the Gathering setting, and and this is specifically one of them, right? How do you make your players feel useful in a campaign where they are, or in a setting where they are, by definition, side characters, right?
Yeah, and this is, a more general problem because we as DMs often want to have a war of the gods or some creature, war of the dragon lords, more powerful than the players. How do you deal with that?
Well, for me, I would say shift the focus.
Yeah.
Right? So rather than the players, like the
instead of them helping out in the battle, their quest is elsewhere while this is going on.
Right, exactly.
Right?
The war is happening, but what's really and it can be it should be
what really matters is who controls the Eye of Bolas.
Exactly.
Or something.
Something very important, right? Like, there's a smaller community or a smaller group that is under threat, or there's something very critical to people they care about that they have to deal with, and the outcome of the war matters, but not in the same way that their smaller quest does. Yes. And whatever's happening downstream from the war matters, and has an impact, but their own quest and their own, I guess, a frame of reference is entirely different.
Right. So there are basically two solutions to these type of problems in general, right? You can go with the sort of 1917 or Saving Private Ryan situation. There's a bigger war going on. The players are not determining the outcome, but what matters to them is not winning the war. It's something else. Or you can basically say, well, the war is going on and more powerful people than you are fighting on both sides. But what will really determine the outcome is this one thing the players know about, right? Mm-hmm. Securing the secret intelligence of the enemy troop movements, right? In a more real world example, or in a fantasy thing like Ravnica, right? Collecting the staff of the, I don't know anything about Magic the Gathering. I'm just going to throw out some words. The staff of the Allspark to seal Bolas in
staff
his.
Of the Allspark is what Optimus Prime. No, but that I like
transform and roll out.
And I like the 1917 or Saving Private Ryan, right? Because those are beautiful, engaging, powerful stories that don't matter. Or, well, 1917 matters a little bit to the overall war, but generally what happens in those movies, what happened in those stories, isn't critical to the overall outcome of the war. But you could also do something like, it's a small, what am I thinking of? I don't know. Isn't Das Boot about something? Anyway, finding like critical intelligence or if this is World War II, capturing the
critical artifact,
the Enigma machine, so they can decode Nazi information. Like that's not you're not on the front lines of the Normandy invasion, but you're still having a significant impact on the outcome of the war, right? So your players need to capture. Oh, it's the Death Star plans, right? This is the Rogue One thing, right? It's super important that not Rogue One, right? No, Rogue One. That they capture and discover these Death Star plans so the rebels can eventually win, but they're not actually on the front lines, right? So
yeah.
So that's how I would tell this story.
Here's the way to doctor this scenario, right? To get down to the example, what you want to avoid, and it sounds like your players still had fun, so maybe this isn't such a bad idea. You want to avoid having a big battle and your players are like, oh, we're fighting this small thing, and they look over there and there's much cooler people doing much cooler things and you can't do anything about that. It's off in the distance, right? What I like to avoid as a dungeon master is giving my players things that they can see that are cool that they can't affect or interact
right
with.
Yeah,
it's super frustrating.
Yeah,
right. At least to me as a player, maybe not to every player, right? So in my opinion, you want to avoid that. Instead, give them the fact that there is a rogue planeswalker here murdering people that they know, and their job as a party is to team up and kill that planeswalker and steal his or her spark so they can become planeswalkers themselves, right?
Yeah. And I like to sometimes like give the impression of a battle or a war happening nearby to add intensity or a ticking clock to their mission, but they shouldn't be witnessing a godlike battle between two demigods and be like, well, go get your MacGuffin, losers. Be selective about how you give the impression of what's happening if there is something bigger than them happening, I guess.
Thanks, Anthony. Patrick also writes, just want to drop a line and say thanks, and I appreciate the podcast. I like the topics, especially the recommendations and transition music. Keep rolling them dice. This letter's from James. Dear Dr. Rob and Dr. Matt, hey guys, long-time listener, first-time caller. Hope you're both well. I'll be brief with the details, but I'm currently running an urban campaign in a huge swamp-adjacent city-state where the dead have physical form. Because of its power, the state is essentially going to be the keystone in negotiating the end of 100 years of war between pretty much everyone else. The bad dudes want to bring a radical candidate into the mayor's office. By the way, I'm also looking for a better term than mayor or patrician for this position if you have any advice, which could result in a war continuing until all the world is ash. Anyhow, the question is this: how are they going to go about rigging an election in their favor? And what things can the party do to rig it back in theirs? As a note, neither of the groups is currently in power, so they can't start gerrymandering or bringing in new voter ID laws. I'm currently thinking of introducing something like the clock system from Blades in the Dark and having a clock for each district or group of import, like churches or trade unions, increasing it when they do missions in favor of certain groups or whatnot. I hope this subject doesn't hit too close to home. I think you guys have some elections going on, but I'm not sure, ? And that you both keep creating wonderful GM advice. Thanks and kind regards, James.
I love this question, and I think this is such a cool idea for a non-standard for a campaign. I think it's super neat. For mayor's office, there's a lot of, you could steal a lot of names from history. Burgermeister, Stadtholder, Doge, Patrician's pretty okay. I don't know. I have like 1,000 of these, James.
Yeah.
But something like that. As for
Lord, you could just go with something more generic. Lord Protector of the city.
Sure. Yeah. Grand something or other. Yeah. Grand Protector. I like the idea of stealing the clock system from Blades in the Dark. For this, you're correct, that they can't go back and gerrymander or, adjust the laws. They've got to work with what they've got. But you can draw from the rich actual history of voter influence in our country, the glorious United States of America. There were long periods when, certain interested parties would literally round people up off the street and get them drunk and take them to the polling station, sometimes changing their clothes and giving them false IDs to boost the numbers.
I think you should add in like a Thieves Guild Tammany Hall that is run by like people who steal stuff and were good at stealing stuff. Your typical Thieves Guild. But since found out in a city this big and important that there's much more gold to be made in drainage contracts and bridge building contracts for the city.
Listen, you can make some chump change, picking pockets, but the real money's in chamber pot emptying contracts, right?
Yeah, I would say like, if you're looking for inspiration, read The Power Broker by Robert Caro, right? A biography of Robert Moses, and just like throw in all kinds of stuff from there. I mean, I like ticking clocks if your players are like, I really need to keep track of this. But having an all-out election sort of battle and convincing all these power brokers, right, is something that I think will be just as satisfying, right?
Yeah, you can
clearly lay it out for your players, right? Let them meet with or do some research where they can clearly see the webs of power in the city, right? And then let them make their own decisions on how they want to approach fighting this election rigging.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of like interesting ways, and depending on how comfortable you are with your GMing, you can just sort of like let your players loose and see how they approach this. But you could also do something as simple as saying, this is the person, or these are the groups that are the most important in each of these districts, and you need to either win them over, threaten them, blackmail them, or gain their favor. And then that could just be a whole series of more ordinary type quests. But
right.
Yeah.
And then that'll make it easy for you to plan. Okay, we have 6 districts. We're going to do a mission in each. And then really make sure you spice it up, at least after the first one, right? Well, in a way to remind your players there are other people acting in the world as well, right? So, they're trying to do this, but the other side is just trying to kill that person.
Yeah. This is a great idea, and I can think of just like a whole bunch of ways to run this. And honestly, I think this would be a great idea for like a whole campaign. Is I don't know, like the entire like year or months leading up to a critical election like this. Oh, that would be so much fun. I love this idea, James, and I'm curious to see how it turns out. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for writing in.
Well, while Rob's picking the next letter, I took one of our listeners' advice from an email way back about role-playing Kinku, and it was sort of a more lighthearted, funny one-shot. And I could see how you could role-play a serious Kinku, but I had a ton of fun playing my Kinku like a soundboard from a morning radio DJ. Where he collect words and phrases that people had said and was tried to combine them in interesting ways to make his point. Love that Kinku advice. All right, Rob, what's your letter?
Okay, so this one is from Santiago, and Santiago writes, my question is, how do I design encounters when a player's incompetence and a refusal to amend it makes an appropriate fight difficult for all the wrong reasons? So Santiago writes, long story short, I, as a bard, was constantly out damaging another player who went through 3 Oathbreaker paladins that never smited and spent the final fight as a distance. He nearly caused a TPK, and a sorcerer had to waste all 3 charges on his wish ring.
Wow.
Now I'm taking back over as a DM, and he plays a monk and only knows how to use Flurry of Blows with his key instead of other abilities. There are other people that outclass him when they shouldn't. Love to hear your take. Sorry for the long rant. Santiago. Good question, Santiago. This is an interesting one for me because I think a lot of recent advice would say, you know, people can play however they want to play and nobody has to be optimal. But this does sound like kind of a problem. So, I don't know, Matt, what do you think?
Listen, if you're gosh, it's really frustrating when I feel like almost every player I've ever had does have the desire to basically get better at the game all the time, because when they're sitting around with other folks, right, they see someone do some really dramatic or heartwarming or interesting role playing, or they see someone else do something incredibly clever to solve a problem, or they see someone else build and deploy an optimal character, and at least several of those things appeal to them and they try and get better. And it sounds like you have a player who's just, you know, do not want to get better, right?
Yeah, and I have players who struggle with mechanics, but they're trying to get better, and they listen to advice. And
right, exactly. That's all you want.
And they, you know, and I feel bad because sometimes I think they feel like they're not contributing. But honestly, it's not super hard to pull your weight if you're, you know, just using most of your abilities at vaguely the right time. So, I mean, this might be, I mean, I don't know this person, but this might be, you know, a bad fit for the group. But
my advice would be like play a one shot with a rules light or a different system that breaks everyone out of this mold of thinking and you know, maybe forces this person to like confront how they engage with role playing games and other people at the table.
Yeah.
Just a random thought.
Yeah,
there.
It sounds like you might need to like break things down and start from first principles. Maybe you
don't have to abandon your campaign, but right, try something different, right, to reinforce those first principles.
Yeah, if this doesn't get better, I would say like be like, hey, we're gonna put this on a hiatus. I'm gonna run a couple of one shots. Maybe even do like pre-assigned characters for like a one shot for third or, you know, fifth, and just see how it plays out. Like, I don't know. Maybe this player is struggling with too many options. Maybe that's why they only want to do one or two things in combat. I mean, it may not be fixable, and if it's, like, causing problems in the game, then, you know, it may be a conversation about whether or not this is a good fit for the group, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge problem.
Right. I mean, what do you do when a player, you know, doesn't want to learn? You know, I think one other option, right, and is got to be to make sure that you as a dungeon master are providing rewards for people who do learn, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is the case. It almost certainly isn't, but just to double check, right? Make sure that your other players who are playing their characters optimally are feeling the reward for that optimal play.
Right. And yeah, you want to encourage, I don't know, it just, we don't want the game to feel like it's a power game or like it's a numbers thing. Like nobody should have to feel like they need to have system mastery to participate, but I feel like 5th edition especially isn't that complicated, and you should be interested in learning or getting better, and if it's constantly causing problems, it sounds
you can always cut this person out. Remember, if you've pulled them aside outside of the game and say, hey, I would love to go over your character with you to show you the ways this game can be more fun for you and everyone, and you're saying something like, they've refused to learn for a year, maybe you don't want them at your game anymore. It's fine.
Yeah.
Last letter. Thanks for listening. This one is from Brian. Microscope in History. Dear Rob and Matt, I listened to your episode on Microscope RPG a while ago and was inspired to try using it to write a part of the history for my own campaign world. I've been running this new world for 9 sessions and purposely left a lot of the background history of foreign lands vague and undeveloped. I thought Microsoft would be perfect for this situation, and I was right. As my game has continued, I have found many benefits to having used Microscope. My favorite is that the history is more solid in my own head this way. Had I simply spent 6 hours thinking about the events, I would have been less creative and more vague. Microsoft solidified the connections between people and events in my head. Now I'm much better at recalling these things on the fly in the game. I would absolutely recommend creating history in your game with Microscope with one caveat. Use it to create ancient history and foreign influences. Had we been creating the history for the land the heroes are in now, we would have more difficulty making sure everything fit together in the end. Since we keep them separated, it meant that we had a space to create, and now I find that some of the ancient history is now acting on the hero's current situation in interesting ways I would never have imagined. 10 out of 10 would recommend Microscope. Thanks for all you're doing for DMs and the RPG community. Brian.
Thank you. I'm really glad that this thing that we discovered or that we revealed or that we shared was useful to people. Matt, you just revisited Microscope in a big way, right?
I just got back from running a table of drop-in, drop-out, as you go Microscope all day at a convention. I ran it for around 8 hours, had, I think, over 11 different players come by. We played 5 different Microscope timelines, and I have to say, after playing lots of Microscope, it's a game it's hard to get tired of. And if maybe you don't want to do something as crazy as Brian, which is to use Microscope to write parts of the history of your world, though you should. It's honestly, if you want a way to practice world building and practice thinking about world building smart, then Microscope is pretty much one of your very few options, right?
I also love Brian's suggestions about limiting the scope, to ancient history or foreign influence. Maybe there's a part of the world building that you feel solid on, but, you want to allow your players to build out some stuff that's less well developed. I think this is just like a super cool idea. I think this probably worked really well for Brian. So, and, I think it depends. I think we talked about this when we did the Microscope. It depends on your group and the people you're with, but it's easy to do. It doesn't require a ton of knowledge or investment. Learning. Yes. You're just working together and telling a story. And I think it's a great idea. So I'm really glad to hear that it worked out so well for Brian.
One of my players yesterday was having so much fun with our Microscope game of telling a world building a superheroes world that he canceled one of the coveted slots for the reissue of the Dune board game that everyone was clamoring for to stay and play in. What better compliment can you have than that?
You can't. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that this worked out great.
Yeah. Okay, a second recommend for Microscope.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for writing in. I know we didn't get to all of your letters. We will hopefully get through more next week, assuming that we are not shut down by the big music industry goons banging on our doors and dragging us away to the record company gulags. I don't know. What do they do? There's issue a cease and desist. Anyway, assuming that doesn't happen...
pressing vinyl in Siberia.
Assuming that doesn't happen, we'll be back next week. Continue writing in. Thanks for listening. Please rate and review, and tell your friends, your DMs, and keep rolling them dice, everybody.